Hello, thanks for stopping by. And in today's video, I am creating a gatefold card that features a little fall scene. And I'm starting with an 8.5 by 5.5 piece of cardstock. And I'm going to be scoring at 2 1/8 and then flipping it around to score at 2 1/8 again. And this will form the front fold of the card, which will be 4 1/4 by 5.5. On the background of the card base, I'm going to be stamping this script background stamp. And I'm placing my card base directly into my MISTI on a sticky mat right in the center. And then I'm going to be adding a strip of Post-it tape between the two flaps, just in case the background stamp gets inside. I don't want it to get inside, so I'm putting that tape there to prevent that. I'm also taping down each of the panels so that I can easily stamp the background stamp. To form part of the gatefold, I'm going to be creating a frame out of this postage die set. And so this will form part of the gatefold. And then I'm going to be cutting out a rectangle die that fits right inside the postage frame, and that will form the scene of the card. I'm going to be doing some hills. So to create the hills, I'm going to be die cutting the green cardstock out of the rectangle die that's the same size as the background, and then I'm going to line up the hill shapes on those die cuts to form sort of the hills of the card. And since I'm not entirely sure where I want those hills to be, I'm going to go ahead and cut out my tree shapes as part of the scene as well here. So now I'm just lining them up to get a sense of where I want my hills to be on these cardstock. And then once I decide, I'm going to tape it down and then run the die cut through my die cutting machine. So having previously cut it out of the rectangle, now it'll line up perfectly with the background rectangle. And then the hills will layer on top of that. And I'm just using these tree branches to just get a sense of where I might want my hills to go. And at this point I decided that I think I want a third hill. So I'm going to create another hill out of an even lighter color of green cardstock. So again, I'm cutting that out of the rectangle shape first. And it doesn't have to be a full rectangle because we're just going to cut off the edge, so it's just partial the rectangle. Then I'm running the hill through the die cutting machine, and now I have my final hill. So I have 3 layers of hills that will form sort of the base or bottom of my card scene. I'm going to add some pumpkin dies, some accent dies. So I'm not sure what color to cut them out of, so I'm just sort of picking a bunch of colors. And now I'm cutting out the leaves. And so there's a large bunch of leaves and a small bunch of leaves, and I'm just going to create an assortment of leaves to cut out of these various color cardstock. So I have 3 in orange and 3 in yellow, and I'm thinking about doing 2 trees, although I changed my mind and end up only doing 1 tree. But at the time I was thinking of doing 2, and so I'm just trying to create an assortment of different sizes and colors of these leaves that will then form our fall trees or our fall tree. And once I have all of those pieces cut out, I'll run them through my die cutting machine a bunch of times since I have to repeat the shape since there's only 2 dies to create all of the shapes. But then I'll have all of my tree shapes, and I've die cut my pumpkins out, and now I'm going to start assembling the scene. So in the first part, I'm going to glue all of my hills together. So starting with the darkest hill, and then gluing it onto the medium tone hill, and then gluing it onto the lighter tone hill. And I'm doing this first so that I can then use that to line up and determine how I want to do my ink blending background. So I'm using 3 colors of Distress Oxide inks, Carved Pumpkin, Picked Raspberry, and Seedless Preserves. And so I'm using the hills to sort of determine how low I have to go on the back panel, and then I'm just adding the various colors that I've picked out for my sky, and then just making sure I get a really good blend going back over and making sure it's a really nice blend. I cut out a lot of this because it can be kind of tediously boring to watch, but it did take a little bit to sort of get the perfect sort of blend. And then once I'm satisfied with my blended background, I'm going to go ahead and glue the hills directly onto the card, or on this panel. And it's this point that I decided I wanted to do one tree, and I wanted to sort of nestle the sentiment next to the one tree. So I picked out that hello stamp, which I'll stamp in just a minute. I'm still waiting for my Distress Oxide ink background to dry, so I'm going ahead and gluing these pumpkins down onto their little top stems, and then I'm going to go ahead and trim off the excess pumpkin, since it was one shape for multiple pumpkin stems. And I used 2 different dyes or 2 different colors to sort of get these pumpkins. And so now I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment, which is just a little hello. I really like this font, and I'm going to do it in white embossing powder. So I'm laying down my anti-static powder tool, and then I'm applying my embossing ink, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp that sentiment. It's just right above the hill, so it's almost kind of nestled like on the horizon. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply the white embossing powder, and then I'm going to go ahead and heat set that. And the next part is the fun part, but also the part that I really struggle with, and that's assembling my tree and trying to make sure, I have a good assortment and array of different leaves and bunches and stuff. And so I'm gluing the 2 trunks together, and then I'll trim off some of the excess of that stump at the bottom so that it doesn't show through on the card behind the leaves. And then now I'm going to assemble my leaves. So this did take me quite a long time to figure out exactly what layout I wanted, but I've cut that out just because it's just sort of me kind of fiddling with different pieces and moving them around and moving them back, and I finally decided on a layout, and so this is the layout that I am now assembling. So I'm basically gluing together the oranges and then the yellows and trying to form sort of 2 different kind of sections of the tree. So I'm going to go ahead and glue my orange bunch of leaves down onto the tree branches. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue the entire tree trunk down onto the card just to make sure that I have good spacing and before putting on my last leaf. And I'm going to go ahead and trim this branch because it just kind of looks weird. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue down the yellow bunches of leaves on the top. And then while that's drying, I'm gluing down the pumpkins. So I have 2 little pumpkins that are just going to sort of sit on this hill here at the bottom. And then I wanted to give some more structure to my gold frame, so I die cut out 2 additional postage frames out of white cardstock, and I'm just gluing them to the back of the gold frame just to give it a little bit more structure, since that will be opening and closing a lot. I wanted to make sure it was really strong and sturdy. And now it's time to glue it onto our card base. So I'm only applying glue to one side of the frame since it's going to be opening. It only needs to be on one side. And I'm going to offset this at a little bit of an angle just to create some interest. So I just have the glue on the right side there. And then on our panel, I'm going to apply glue just to the left side of the panel. And then adding that to the card base. And then letting it dry, but just showing that it does open, and so there isn't any overhanging glue or anything. So I'm just gonna let that sort of dry. And so they sort of slip in together, and then that creates our gatefold. So it's a little postage scene that then opens up into the center of the card where you can write your message. And I really love the way this turned out. I think it's very fall festive, and I love the colors, and it's just it was a really fun card to make. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video.